It's not about the fact that, we are able to do business or to, thrive in the workplace in the current moment, but it's about how able are we to adapt to an ever evolving market or marketplace. Well, first of all, new technologies always bring about lots of advantages to businesses, but also lots of challenges. And so some of the main ones include, first of all, the problem related to the lack of digital literacy when it comes to the teams that adopt these technologies, right? So as much as with calculators in the 80s, as much as with AI today, actually, outcomes are very different through the use of technology, depending on how much people who are using it are able to prompt them better, use better data, and so on. And so, whenever we look at the budgets going to new technologies in companies, usually 90% goes to the tech itself, and just 10% goes to training and empowering people to better use these technologies. And so the first point here is that, we focus so much on rolling out the latest technologies, but we don't focus enough on preparing people to use them. Which brings us to a second big point, which is people's resistance to new technologies, mainly for fear of substitution. Again, if teams do not really understand or grasp the potential benefits of the technology, but just see that these technologies are more efficient and productive than themselves, human beings, well, they'll of course resist to them. And resistance can take many forms. Even lack of usage is one form of resistance, right? And so if we, again, because people don't understand its benefits, don't use them, well, then it's a second big challenge. And a third one, maybe, we see very often the rollout of new technologies, but not aligned with the company's pain points. What I mean by that is that we often see companies adopting new technologies because it's fashionable, because everybody talks about AI or large language models or many different tools for automations and data analysis, but we don't see them as really focused or aligned, at least, with the core business, right? And so we roll out these technologies, they're scattered across the company, they're just individual projects that still do not really merge with the company's pain points. So I think these are some of the biggest challenges, but definitely there's many more. So I recently published a book on this, exactly on the skill set needed in the age of AI. Specifically, my book is called Meta Leadership. And so I'll name a few of these leadership principles or skills, if we might. So the first one I call reperception. So since the external world is changing at an exponential rate, which is actually faster than the one we were used at during the age of the internet and so on, because traditional computing and the internet were basically accelerated by what we call the Moore's law, right? That said that the capacity of processing of semiconductors would double every 2 years. Well, today we live in what is oftentimes called the Huang's law, based on Jensen Huang, NVIDIA CEO, which is about 3 times faster than Moore's law. Why? Because of accelerated computing based on GPUs. And so reperception is basically a leadership principle that speaks about the ability of leaders to update their vision of their business, their market, and eventually the world in face of external changes, right? So perception, traditionally, is the ability to, basically see new things, see novelty, and, make decisions based on them. But the truth is that we need reperception. Why? Because we need also to give up on our past vision of the world. Why? Because it changes so fast. A second principle is what I call data sense making, right? Data sense making is the ability of leaders to actually not only have analytical skills and have the highest IQ to crunch data and be very, very efficient at data analysis, but it's about the ability to use AI tools to do that, and eventually to migrate on a focus to picking the right KPIs and letting AI crunch the data. What does it mean picking the right KPIs? Eventually, when we think about leaders in organizations, we all look at the traditional KPIs. Growth, month on month, year on year. We look at, sales and EBITDA. But if we all look at the same KPIs, right, we don't have a very different vision of business compared to our competition. If we pick new KPIs, namely, I don't know, like the correlations between some of them, well, that's where we can have extremely novel insights and again get a competitive advantage when it comes to decision making with respect to the competition. And the third leadership principle that is very important is trust. Stats, first of all, show that most employees at organizations do not trust or would not trust an AI leader, right? And this actually is logical. Why? Because humans are the only ones able to establish trust, because this is one of the few things that AI and new technologies cannot substitute, and that people miss out at the workplace because, we don't trust AI because of a number of issues. Explainability problems, namely, we don't know exactly how their algorithms work. We don't exactly know the data sets, so we might, fear they're biased and so on. Well, instead, with human beings, we can establish trust through a number of factors: vulnerability, reciprocation, and a number of other very specifically human mechanisms. And so I think trust is another leadership principle that cannot really be substituted, and that's essential to thrive in the digital age. So this is a great point because to start off, soft skills are more and more important in the workplace. And 2 years ago, I made a survey and I asked to 247 HR leaders the following question: if you were to recruit someone on your team or for your company, would you rather hire someone who had great hard skills but no soft skills, or someone that had great soft skills and no hard skills? And believe it or not, 93% of the HR leaders said, I would rather hire the second candidate, namely good soft skills and no hard skills. And that shocked me because I grew up in a world, as much as you're listening, in a world that prioritized hard skills, right? We were taught that basically, knowledge of things and IQ would be, the best predictors of our success in the workplace, and that soft skills such as empathy, empathy, vulnerability, and I'll name some here, were not important because they were hard to measure, hard to teach, and therefore inefficient. But these stats, these survey and its result showed something very different. Showed that nowadays, more and more in the workplace, soft skills are important. And so I asked the participants why. Tell me why. And they said for two main things. First of all, hard skills are much easier to teach if a candidate doesn't have them than soft skills. But that's not the main point. The main point is the second one. And it is, they've said, well, Andrea, in our company, we already have AI tools that are much better than our, employees and workers at hard skills. They code faster, they have more access to knowledge, they learn faster, but they don't have the same soft skills. And so soft skills are important because they're unsubstitutable and they represent the competitive advantage that humans have in the workplace. And so some of them are extremely important. First of all, I would define as likely one of the most important here, being critical thinking, right? We have our logic part of the brain, but we also have our sometimes illogical part of the brain, right? It's not only the emotional side, but it's about the one that thinks out of the box and that has, again, critical sense. Whenever we look at things from different perspectives, whenever we make questions that really want to defy the status quo, that's when we use critical thinking. It's a very, very important soft skill. The second one is adaptability, right? We've said that, the world is changing at an exponential rate that is even faster than the one we were used. too. And so adaptability becomes an imperative because it's not about the fact that, we are able to do business or to, thrive in the workplace in the current moment, but it's about how able are we to adapt to an ever evolving market or marketplace, right? And maybe another very important soft skill I would name vulnerability, because vulnerability is very important because, first of all, according to the definition of trust in psychology, it stems from vulnerability. Because if we're not able to be vulnerable, we're not going to be able to establish trust. And since I've already mentioned that trust is one of the leadership principles that I deem very important in the age of AI, I would also consider vulnerability as a very important soft skill that professionals should prioritize in the digital age. So digital transformation, of course, is a term used for many technologies and the impact that they have on businesses of all sorts. But we have, again, to differentiate some of their impact. And so the first thing that we have to notice is that usually the adoption of new technologies and digital transformation, including AI technologies, usually starts in B2C sectors. And why B2C sectors? Because they're closest to they're the ones that are closest to the end consumer. And usually change in the demand for new technologies, for new experiences, for new products and services always starts from the end consumer. And so, for example, sectors like retail, banking or financial services, again, are sectors that usually start off in the adoption of new technologies earlier on that B2B sectors, such as, mining, pharma, and so on. But look at how interesting. The big impact of digital transformation exactly lies in B2B sectors. And why? Because that's where the biggest opportunity lies. Again, being consumer facing, you are more reactive to change, and therefore you have a bigger sense of urgency of reinventing your business through technology and digital transformation. But then when most of your competitors are doing the same, well, your differentiator becomes, the experience that you provide and so on. It's not only the digital transformation. Now, in B2B sectors, that's where digital transformation, the early adopters of digital transformation, gain the most competitive advantage. And so there's a great Deloitte report from their team in Australia that is called Short Fuse, Big Bang. And so what does it mean? Well, actually, it was long fuse, Big Bang. Namely, B2B sectors take longer to accelerate their digital transformation, but the bang, eventually the explosion of it, the impact of it in their industry and sector is usually bigger than in B2C sectors.